So welcome to Holistic AI's June Policy Hour. As you may know already, we are doing monthly policy hours covering different and emerging aspects of AI governance. And for each policy hour, we have our guest expert. And today we have Aranda from OECD with us. So for those who are joining us for the first time, Holistic AI is an AI governance platform with a mission to empower enterprises to adopt and scale AI with confidence. We are a multidisciplinary team of AI and machine learning engineers, data scientists, ethicists, business psychologists, as well as legal and policy experts. We have deep practical expertise in experience in auditing AI systems. So our clients are enterprises from Fortune 500 corporations, SMEs, governments, and regulators. We work with several organizations, including OECD, Council of Europe. We are also in contact with the European Commission, so all those public institutions as well. And my name is Osman Gazi Güçlütürk. I'm from the policy team at Holistic AI. And today with me, I have Aranda from OECD. Welcome, Luis, to this month's policy hour. Can you just introduce yourself to us? I don't think you need an introduction, but just to set the stage, right? Can you just tell us briefly about yourself?
Thank you, Osman, and I'm very excited to be here today. A little bit about me. I've been working on AI governance topic at the OECD for the past 7 years now, and before that, I have an engineering background and also an econometrics background, and also some years of experience in the technology, in the private sector for technology companies. So I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you again for being here with us. Now let's just proceed with the actually webinar. So, Luis, OECD is one of the major players in AI governance internationally. There are many international organizations getting involved with AI governance. We see countries, organizations, big corporations. But can you just, again, to set the stage right, tell us about OECD, what it does in terms of AI and AI governance and any sort of AI interactions on global scale?
Yeah, definitely, and I think that's a good starting point, because I see a lot of people connected, which is amazing. But I'm not sure everyone knows what the OECD does. So I'm just gonna say a couple of words about that. The OECD is a treaty-based organization, an international organization that has 38 member countries, what are usually described as like-minded countries, and its mission is to make better policies for better lives. Now, the OECD mirrors the structure of a national government. So we have different directorates going from labor, which correspond to the ministries of labor, to education, to science and technology, and so on. So why is the structure designed to be like a national government? Is because what we do is we're a forum where governments can come and meet and share good practices. That's one of our core missions, the sharing of good practices. Now, it's important to clarify here that the OECD, while we provide policy recommendations to governments in different topics, the recommendations are usually non-binding in a legal sense, which means that we don't have an OECD police that is enforcing OECD standards and instruments. So I just wanted to say that from the outset, and I mean, we'll have questions at the end, but I'm happy to explain more if that's needed. Would you like me to say what we do on AI? Maybe that's even better now that we've...
Yes, please.
Yeah. So what we do in AI, as I said, we've been working on this for some time now. We've been playing a crucial role to date in the AI governance landscape. You see some initiatives on screen that the Holistic AI team helped us very kindly to put together in a slide. But I think I'll mention 4 of our main functions when it comes to AI governance. At the OECD, we develop conceptual frameworks for interoperability. So to us, interoperability is the name of the game. It was the name of the game when we did the AI principles in 2019, and it's still the name of the game today that global AI governance is everyone is talking about that. So what do I mean by conceptual frameworks? Well, you can think of them as, of course, the OECD AI principles, the definition of AI systems, which has been widely adopted in legal frameworks like the EU AI Act or the EU's executive order and NIST work as well, the AI system lifecycle, definition of AI incidents, which just came out a couple of months ago, and also we're working, for instance, just to give another example of a conceptual framework, we're working to develop an incident reporting framework that would allow countries to report incidents in an interoperable way, right? So if an incident happens in Australia, people in the US would know about it and they could recall the product or take action, right? So that's the conceptual role we play, conceptual frameworks. The second thing is the evidence base. We are known not only in the AI field, but the OECD as a whole is known for its evidence-based policy advice, and in the AI work, we illustrate this by, for instance, if you go to OECD.ai, the policy observatory, we have over 250 indicators on live or quasi-live trends and developments in AI. It goes from research to investments to skills and jobs and so on. So evidence base is the second point. The third point is the multi-stakeholder engagement. We try to do everything in a very consensual way. That's how we work by consensus at the OECD. So we have a network of AI experts with over 400 experts. We have, of course, very, very active participation from the experts from Holistic AI. We're very thankful for that. And also our working party, which is our formal structure, we have advisory committees where the civil society advisory committee participates, the trade union advisory committee participates, business participates. So it's a very much multi-stakeholder process. And I'll just end by saying this is the fourth thing. We have a long-standing AI policy experience. I mentioned it before, but we've been at this since 2016, when AI policy basically was not in the radar. It's government saw it as, back then, they saw it as almost like science fiction, right? So when Japan tasked the OECD for the first time to develop AI principles at the G7 in 2016, it didn't gather a lot of support from other countries because it seemed that it was just not necessary at that point in time. Of course, now we know it was very important to do so, and it's been replicated by other organizations like UNESCO and companies and so on. But that's how we got to the first intergovernmental standard on AI, the OECD AI principles. Now, I'll stop there. Back to you, Osman.
Thank you for this comprehensive summary of what OECD does. And it's always a pleasure for Holistic AI to actually get involved with OECD's work. So I will just go deeper, and maybe we will touch upon some of those issues again on specific aspects of this webinar. When we talk about AI governance, actually, we lawyers tend to confuse that with regulation, but actually AI policy and governance is a more broader concept. And this is like a journey. So we saw principles, we saw ethical principles specifically in place. Then we saw voluntary frameworks, and OECD actually helped with some of those. And then we started to see actually binding rules, and we are going towards the standards. So on this screen, you can see this journey. Of course, this is not clear cut. So with the legislations, we also have standards. We still have voluntary frameworks. But I just, based on this journey, let's say, I just wanted to ask your opinion on the trend. how do you think the field look like in terms of global governance? I mean, will regulations take over, or will standards take over in practice, or will we see principles just like we have in the US, like NIST framework? What's gonna look like in, I don't know, 2 years time, 5 years time, 10 years time, in terms of global AI governance, do you think?
Yeah, good. Like, this is very connected to what I was to the last point I made right now on the principles, right? So in 2016, 2017, when we mentioned principles, AI principles, countries were like, not really. Then we started seeing a transition where principles seemed quite necessary, and so they were developed. They started to be developed. There was international agreement on principles, but then everyone started saying principles are fine, which is, you know, the 10 commandments for AI, but how do we implement them? What happens next? And then that's where we started to see regulation, legislation. This is what you have on the slide. And that's I think in the previous couple of years what we've seen as the trend, you know, jumping from principles to regulation to policies. But then the question came up, you know, now that we have regulations, how do we implement them in practice? You know, and that's what you have here in your last item, the standards. But I wouldn't stop there, because even when even once you get to standards, the question today is, okay, standards are telling me that you know, my systems need to be transparent or explainable, but they're not telling me how to do that. They're not giving me a way to measure those attributes. So we see a lot of the discussions now moving to the metrics. You know, what are the metrics that we should use? What are the thresholds? Even in the AI safety institutes that we've seen now, I think there are like 8 or 9 AI institutes, safety institutes around the world. They're trying to come up with a threshold to define whether an AI system is high risk or not. You know, is it the flops? Is it how many you know, like, so those thresholds, we're still talking about them. We haven't come to an agreement on those metrics and thresholds and so on. So I see a very clear trend right there. Now the question, as you asked, it was very broad. It's we see also a lot of trends related to global governance. So I think we've all heard about, you know, whether there should be an IPCC for AI, or a CERN for AI, or even an IAEA, the Atomic Energy Agency. You know, we've all heard these different institutional analogies for AI. And I think that's where the discussion is today. We see, I'll tell you what we see from our side. We see initiatives at the global level. Of course, the United Nations with the high-level advisory body on AI, UNESCO with their principles, the World Bank with some initiatives as well. We see initiatives at the regional level. So you see the EU AI Act, the African Union continental AI strategy, and so on. But then we also see the multilateral initiatives that are actually bridging the gap between global, regional, and even national efforts in AI governance. So this is examples include, for instance, the OECD, what we do here, the Global Partnership on AI, the Trade and Technology Council between the EU and the US, and of course the G7 and the G20, right? So all of these initiatives are not regional, not global, not national, but they're informal mechanisms for the most part that are building this bridge between all the different initiatives. As far as we're aware, well, let's maybe I'll mention this at a different point, but there was a point in your question. I don't know if we should get into that now. Like, how do we see things in 2, 5, 10 years? I think you mentioned 10 years. Is that the right? Did I get that right, Osman?
We can touch upon that in other slides as well. So it's up to you.
Okay.
just to mention now.
Yeah. Okay. If you want to touch on it later, that's fine.
I have more specific question to you about actually. So I was one of those people who said, okay, enough with principles, because we all want AI to respect human rights, we are AI to be responsible, and we sort of agree on that. But the problem to me was we didn't know how to do that, and we still don't. So I just want to have a question to your engineering background. Do you think that standards or implementation guidelines will turn that AI compliance, AI governance practice into a checkbox example, checkbox practice? So I have this threshold, I check, I have this flop check. Will it be something like that, or will there be more substantial or conceptual governance schemes in place?
That's a good question. I think it's both. It's yes, you need metrics, you need checkboxes, and ways to know that you're actually compliant with regulation. But you also need frameworks, conceptual frameworks that enable you to stay agile, because the technology is going to keep moving, the thresholds are going to move. So we still need to find that flexible mechanism at the international and global level that would allow us to move with the technology, as fast as the technology, without overseeing risks. And of course, one of the things I didn't mention before, but the way we see AI at the OECD is we put a lot of emphasis on the opportunities of the technology, because we've seen a trend in recent years that focuses a lot more on the risks, and that's fine. But let's not lose sight of all the opportunities in terms of productivity, business opportunities, new business models. You know, companies like Holistic AI that are now here, that they wouldn't be here if AI didn't come with opportunities and risks as well, right? Because you're also looking at the risks. So we try to keep a balanced approach. But definitely, I think that's one conversation that's going to have to continue in the future. This is not like climate change, where you can, for instance, set up a threshold, and I think it could be 2 degrees, or, you know, technology keeps moving and thresholds are going to move. So it's a moving target, and we need a conceptual framework that allows us to stay flexible while at the same time mitigating risks.
Well, thank you for the answer. I totally agree. And so I have the privilege of asking questions on the spot, but for our audience, let me just remind you that if you have any questions, drop them in chat. Our team is collecting them, and we'll ask them to Luis at the end of the webinar. So now I want to proceed to the actually substance of these different blogs, if that's okay with you. So on the screen, you can see AI principles, OECD AI principles. There are 2 different branches. One is value-based principles, the other one is recommendation for policymakers. I just want to ask, because I am sort of skeptic against principles, because they're broadly drafted, and these are quite specific compared to the initial ones actually we saw worldwide. What are the implications of these principles for policymakers, for developers, for AI system providers, or for users? What should they get from these principles?
Yeah, this is a good question, right? So the goal of the principles is actually to provide a baseline for AI governance, right? This is actually what they do, is they lay the groundwork for any kind of international convergence. Now we cannot talk about interoperability if we don't talk about the principles first, right? So we have to see them as the common ground, the values that everyone or most people can and should agree on. They're giving you the what, they're not giving you the how, and this is where people struggle, right? Thank you for the principles, but you're not telling me how to, you know, implement them. And this means that different countries can actually find very different ways to implement them. and that's okay, but at least we can agree on what we're implementing, what everyone is implementing. What we're doing at the OECD, and because we understand that we acknowledge this challenge on the side, as you mentioned, Osman, of the user, and to be very straightforward with you, our audience is mainly policymakers, but we're also aware of you know, like, of course, developers and deployers and so on. So what we're doing, we right after the principles, we implemented two main initiatives to help countries and users implement the principles. Number one, the OECD.ai Policy Observatory that I'll invite you all to visit, OECD.ai. And this is helping, of course, policymakers, but everyone else implement the principles by providing data, by providing evidence, by sharing good practices, sharing what's working, what's not working. For instance, in the slide, in one of the slides before, we saw that one of the initiatives is the catalog of tools and metrics for trustworthy AI, which is a collection of those tools that are helping people implement the principles. So these are not like tools that are out there and you know, like they're not practical, they're not concrete. It's quite the opposite. They're concrete tools. Some of them are technical that come with code. Some of them are procedural that, you know, like giving you codes of conduct, standards and guidelines and so on. And some of them are educational. And that means that, you know, you can get tutorials on how to implement some things or some capacity building tools as well. So we have this catalog to try to help people implement the principles in a more concrete way. And it's been fun to see how people keep submitting. So we were so the success of this tool actually depends on the participation of people, because we're not developing tools, we're not developing metrics. So if people are not submitting, the tool is just going to die and no one will use it. But we've been positively surprised that we see at least one tool being submitted per day. I think we're getting close to 1,000 tools that are, of course, vetted to make sure that they're you know, they're good quality and so on. But you know, and they come with, sometimes they come with use cases. You know, so people submit a tool, but they also submit a use case about it, and that's when they say, this is what I used it for. This is what it's good for, and this is what it's not really that good for. And so that's how we enable learnings and sharing of information, right? So that's just one example of the broader OECD AI Policy Observatory, which is, again, the first initiative. Now going to the second initiative is the network of experts. I mentioned it before in passing, but the network of experts has, I think we have 6 or 7 groups now on different topics, and the topics of each of the groups depend on the priorities of member countries. So they touch on incidents. There's one group on incidents, one group on AI risk, one group on compute and climate, another group on data governance and privacy, and so on, right? So what the network of experts do is provide advice, not only to governments, but also to the AI global ecosystem. For instance, they write a lot of the blogs that we have on the OECD.ai. They're written by experts from our network, where they share, of course, their experience and their views, right? And maybe I'll just mention this one very concrete example of the work we've done with the network of experts, that it's helping people make sense of the principles, right? And I'll mention this because it's a paper co-written with Adriano Koshiyama, who some of you may know, who is of course a great professional and a great human being, but he's also the founder and CEO of Holistic AI, and he's one of our experts. And the paper was about advancing accountability in AI. You'll find it online. And it's really about developing a framework that could help companies and everyone manage AI risks throughout the system lifecycle, right? So how do you embed the principles in a risk management framework? And this was published, I think, 2 years ago, way before the whole risk management trend was so mature. We see it very mature now in the AI community. But I just wanted to mention it as a concrete example.
Well, thank you for that. And yes, so I'm part of one of the expert groups, and really discussions, presentations actually taking place in those groups are really influential and valuable, especially given that the composition of those expert groups. I mean, you see people from different backgrounds, different countries, jurisdictions. It's a real well, illuminating experience for participants actually. So I just want to go with the regulation side, moving from principles. As you can see on the map, and some of our audience may actually recognize this, but we are updating it. So now there are more points. And increasingly, we will see more points popping up on this map. Ironically, we usually refer to regulations as a more concrete points for practical application, but the more regulation we see, it the more difficult it becomes to actually get in compliance with those. So this is also this race. I just want to have your opinion on this actually map, because it seems like all of many countries in the world are trying to come up with different legislations. Do you think that this increasing number of legislation is helpful for convergence in global AI governance, or on the contrary, it will actually create some sort of disruption or well, divergence in harmonized principles, harmonized approach to AI governance?
That's a very good question, and my answer is yes and partly no. AI, we all know this, it's a global issue, which means that no single country will be able to deal with the risks and everything alone, which is what was believed, by the way, not too long ago. But now there is agreement that international cooperation is required. So I think every country needs to have their own initiatives, internal national policies, initiatives, strategies, regulations as they see fit. The challenge here is to ensure that they're interoperable, so they provide companies, so they don't know, let's say this way, that they do not increase the compliance costs for companies, right? And that's where we as the OECD are playing a role here. We're trying to make sure that we have more and more interoperability at the international level. We do believe in the principle of subsidiarity, which some of you may be familiar with, and I think it's very seldom mentioned in AI discussions. But if you don't know about it, it's about, you know, letting the smaller units deal with, I mean, perform their duties or their tasks, and higher authorities should only intervene when the smallest units of governance cannot accomplish something tasks on their own, right? What this is trying to say is that central larger bodies should support rather than overshadow some of the smaller, more local entities. So it is not about countries not regulating or not creating their own national frameworks. It's about, when they do, ensuring that they're talking to one another and ensuring that there is a level playing ground for everyone operating internationally. And this is, in the AI field, this is very important, because we're not talking about M&Es, multinational enterprises. In the AI world, every single startup, SME, that sells their products online becomes an international company, because these products can be bought in any country. And so it's so important to ensure that the compliance ecosystem is easy for companies to understand and to comply with, because otherwise we're putting, maybe the larger companies can deal with the cost of harmonizing things internally, but we cannot expect the same from SMEs, and that's only going to harm competition, you know. And I think, Osman, I think you had my colleague Rashad Abelson last for one of the last policy hours. Is that right?
Yes, yes. Seed was moderating that, sorry. But yes, we did that call with Rashad as well.
Yeah, so Rashad, we're working very closely with Rashad to develop a responsible business conduct guidelines for AI, which is basically trying to solve this problem of fragmentation and coming up with it's a sort of certify the certifier mechanism where we're trying to make sure it's been applied in different industries like the financial, the minerals, agriculture, and so on. And the way it works is that it provides very clear guidelines on how to behave responsibly as a business, protect human rights, but it also provides people or stakeholders with a mechanism to complain about business practices. And what happens then is that there is an enforcement mechanism, that it's a light enforcement mechanism. When someone complains, there is a national contact point for every country that receives a complaint and tries to solve the issue by mediation or arbitration before it gets to court, right? So this is we see this as low-hanging fruit for the AI world because it's not only a flexible mechanism, but it also comes with some form of enforcement that other standards usually do not have. So I think Rashad talked about it for an hour last time, so I won't go deep into detail here. But that's one of the things we're doing as an organization to try to enable that interoperability here. And you've probably seen the work of the G7 on AI, the Hiroshima AI process, and the code of conduct. We saw last year a lot of voluntary commitments being signed by the large technology companies. In the US, in Europe, in the G7 with the code of conduct. So what we're trying to do with the G7, we're supporting them to try to come up with a monitoring mechanism for that code of conduct that ensures interoperability between the other, with the other voluntary reporting mechanisms, because even for large companies, it's very hard to fulfill and comply with so many reporting requirements. Even if they're voluntary, it's hard to keep pace. So those are just some of the efforts we're undertaking on this point.
Well, thank you for this very comprehensive answer. Actually, I mean, I agree everything you said, but I specifically want to mention something. We are, as Holistic, seeing because of this increasing number of regulations across jurisdictions or maybe within the EU itself, there's this fear on the part of SMEs. I mean, those
Correct.
regulations should not be turned into obstacles. They should remain as enablers. So there's a real concern, and actually OECD helps with this convergence. We are trying to scale up this compliance efforts through technical tools, but only time will tell actually what's going to look like at the end. And I want to so go into more specific topic about some convergence. You also mentioned this. One of the core issues when we talked about this regulations, specifically some binding legislation, one of the core issues was the definition of AI system. And for the AI Act, we've seen different definitions popping up. The first version, the Commission's proposal included a list of techniques. Then they just got rid of it. And eventually we see a definition by the OECD, almost verbatim, was adopted by the Council of Europe Convention. And there's significant similarity between the Act definition and OECD's definition. I just want to ask you, how was the experience of coming up with this definition? Because what were the most important questions you had to overcome, you had to think of while coming up with this definition? Or as an engineer, do you think that this is a workable definition? This is an actual practical thing. When an engineer looks at it, can identify accurately whether their system is an AI system or not. What do you think about this definition in general?
Yes, so this is the point where there has been actual international convergence, as you mentioned. So we see a lot of uptake of this OECD definition internationally in a lot of legal frameworks. What is the challenge here, and why is it so hard to come up with a definition? The challenge here, and the definition, for background, the OECD definition was updated last year after 8 months of discussions to change very few words in the definition. We had to go through a lot of discussions, and the challenge here is to ensure that the definition is technically accurate, but flexible enough to allow for different jurisdictions to establish their own limits. So that was the main challenge we faced when we were when the countries were discussing this. In the room, we had technical experts and policy people. Of course, our mandate is on the policy side, but the definition had to be technically accurate, which is not the same thing, because some policy people prefer to be very specific, and that's fine. You know, we could have restricted the definition to machine learning or some very specific AI technique, but that would have hindered other jurisdictions which wanted to take a broader approach to AI. So striking the right balance here is very, very hard. And we seem to have come to a compromise with the definition where everyone was equally happy, or I would say in the same but a different way, equally unhappy with the outcome, which means that everyone accepted it. So here again, that's what like there's also a blog post and an explanatory note on the definition that goes through it almost word by word. So I'm happy to share it with OIC. I think someone shared it. But I don't know if that answers the question, Osman.
Yes, it does. I mean, eventually we have this definition. We will probably will see over time whether a given specific application is captured. I mean, there are some, of course, straightforward ones, but there will be some edge cases where we'll see discussions about whether that is captured or not. I remember reading discussions and even papers about the selection of the word inference because of the existence of inference-based systems, stuff like that. So actually, in practice, we'll see how it's going to end up. But thanks for the answer. It actually covers what I wanted to cover.
Yeah, and I think one thing, sorry, one thing that I didn't mention is that this definition, I just mentioned how long it takes to even update a couple of words. Imagine if we had to do it every other month. This is not possible. So the definition, while being technically accurate and at the same time provide, enabling different countries to have flexibility to define what they want to regulate, it needs to be future-proof as much as possible, right? Because you cannot update it every day. So that's another consideration that we need to keep in mind.
I definitely agree. So now I want to move on a general overview of divergences and convergences, and from this I will take you to incidents. But when we look at this general framework, we see some divergences, we see some convergences, and we see actually some divergences seeming like convergences. For example, all those regulations mention high-risk systems. And we see risk-based approach, but actually we don't see a convergence on how to define whether something is high risk or not. Or in terms of standardization, we see a general and increasing reliance on standards, but we don't see the same convergence when it comes to the actual implementation of standards, stuff like that. I want to connect that to an actual discussion about incidents, because all of those discussions are based on the actual risks, actual damages, actual incidents taking place. And when you look at incidents, you see some spread, some figures, some numbers based on different countries, different jurisdictions. I just want to ask, and I want to sneak in here an audience question. First, can you just define what AI incident is? Because one of our audience wants to hear the definition. And second, when you look at those incidents, can you tell that we need international we need an international instrument like Council of Europe's convention or more strict one to solve those problems, solve those incidents, or whether we need regional initiatives taking place to address those increasing number of incidents throughout the world? What do incidents tell us in terms of AI governance in general? The question is this.
Good. So I think there are many questions in one. So let me go. Let me try to address this question to the best of my abilities. I'm going to start by pasting a link in the chat with some resources on our work on AI incidents, where you'll find the definition. You asked me to define an incident. I'll just read it out loud from the publication. Again, this is the agreement from countries. This is not what Luis Aranda says or the OECD says. This is the agreement, the intergovernmental agreement from the group as proposed by the group of experts, right? So an AI incident is an event, circumstance, or series of events where the development, use, or malfunction of one or more AI systems directly or indirectly leads to any of the following harms: injury or harm to the health of a person or to groups of people, disruption of the management and operation of critical infrastructure. Number 3, violations of human rights or a breach of obligations under the applicable law intended to protect fundamental labor and intellectual property rights. And finally, number 4, harm to property, communities, or the environment. You would see that this definition is very aligned with the definition of a serious AI incident in the EU AI Act, but it goes beyond, right? It goes beyond in many ways. It includes not only harms caused by the use and malfunction of an AI system, but also by its development, which gets into harms related to, for instance, data scraping and IP rights and even environmental harms related to compute. It also mentions the concept of communities, which is something that's very important in the global South. And it goes beyond fundamental rights to include, which is a concept that is very well defined in Europe, but not so in other jurisdictions. So, so that's the definition. Now, you mentioned what are the trends that we're seeing. Okay, you're showing some graphs, but I don't know if you've seen the AI incidents monitor that we have at the OECD. I'm happy to provide the link as well in the chat. I just go to oecd.ai/incidents. oecd.ai/incidents. I think someone provided some links there. Okay. So what we see, of course, we all know that it's elections. It's an electoral year around the world. So we're seeing a lot of trends related to misinformation, disinformation, deep fakes, and of course that's related to elections. But we still see things related to IP rights, privacy, cybersecurity, and so on. So those trends, they inform a lot of the work countries are doing. For instance, the G7, when they came up with the Hiroshima AI process, we did a stock taking for them and a survey where they defined misinformation and disinformation as the top priority for countries to address this year when it comes to AI. So the trends that we see in incidents are well aligned with what countries perceive to be their priorities when it comes to AI governance. So this is actually a very, very good sign. Now, I don't know if I covered most, I mean, all of your points. If not, can you ask, can you
Oh yeah, yes you did. Maybe we can just connect that to a question you previously mentioned before actually proceeding with the questions and ending the webinar. So depending on this general overview, what do you think the field will look like in, I don't know, 2 years, 5 years, and 10 years? The question I asked you first.
Okay, yeah, this is a better question to wrap it up, I think. So how do I see things? And now I'll speak in my personal capacity, I guess. So I think I definitely expect AI governance to become a more mature field in the next couple of years, with more, of course, agile and forward-looking mechanisms for AI governance to enable us to keep pace with the rapid developments in the technologies. I mentioned responsible business conduct as an example, but there can be many others. I see a lot of convergence when it comes, as you said, Osman, to principles, to the risk-based approach, to the agreement to that international cooperation is needed. But I see less convergence when it comes to compliance. How do we apply the principles in practice? How do we regulate in practice? How do we comply? How to make standards work? You know, what are the metrics? What are the thresholds? So we've been discussing this all along, I think, this 48 minutes. So I think we can start to see some agreement when it comes to compliance, to the how, right? Not so much to the what anymore, but to the how. And I also think we're going to start seeing a little bit more stability, moving from discussions to actual practice when it comes to global governance of AI. This is not going to be next year. This is probably not going to be in the next couple of years, but I think we're moving towards a networked approach when it comes to global AI governance, where there is no single institution that rules everything, that regulates the world when it comes to AI, but a network of institutions that have different mandates and that are coordinating among themselves. In that sense, there could be a global coordinator or something. Because I think it's hard to think about an international organization, or creating a new international organization for once, that can regulate all aspects of AI, right? So again, I see this more in terms of incremental cooperation, where countries focus on priorities as they go in a more agile and flexible way, and where different institutions with different mandates can contribute to the best of their capacity. So that's what I see. Again, I see a world where there's more cooperation on AI governance, and a world where there is more subsidiarity when it comes to AI governance. So local governments, regional governments, national governments, international organizations, they do what they're supposed to do, and they don't overlap. Yeah, so I think, and I'm hoping that's going to be the case in the next 5 years.
Thank you for this wrap up, let's say. So if that's okay with you, I want to reserve the remaining 10 minutes to questions. And I want to start with a question actually mentioning both holistic and OECD. The question is, have holistic AI or the OECD found any tools that can help with mapping across applicable standards? These crosswalks are helpful, and so are vendors who have done that work for tools, but what is out there for smaller firms who don't have in-house expertise or cash for enterprise licenses? On the part of holistic, we are not doing specific standard mapping, but we have tracker. Actually, we are mapping all those legislations, principles, standards. And this was again a comment on when I showed that map. Well, detailed actually provisions are there, and we will actually keep focusing on those standardization issues. We will implement when we have European standards them to our platform. So we are actually working on that. But what about OECD? Does OECD do something like that, or do you have any recommendations to?
Right. So yeah. So the expert group on risk and accountability actually did some high-level mapping earlier this year, or late last year. I put the link in the chat where we took the main risk management frameworks and standards in AI, and we mapped them to one another, and we found where they converged and where they diverged. Now, this was an initial effort that is being it's being explored in way more detail with the development of the responsible business conduct guidelines, which again, they're not trying to create a new instrument or a new standard. What they're trying to do is to enable that interoperability between the different standards and certifiers and all that. So that's I would mention those examples as way to map what's going on today in the ecosystem.
Thank you for that. Well, we have sector-specific questions mostly, but we have a question on the diversification between public and private sector. I can ask this one. The question is, can you explain and differentiate between a regulation landscape that is relevant to the public sector to the one that is relevant to the private sector? Seems like there's some potential perceived confusion in that regard, like in the US. When it comes to presidential act, probably they're talking about executive orders. That's mostly an issue of national legislation. I mean, president cannot actually command legislature in the US. So there are different things happening in the EU as well. But what let's just maybe rephrase that question. What are the different aspects our audience should follow when it comes to the differentiation between private sector and public sector and their AI governance?
What are the different answers that who should follow? Sorry, I missed that.
So the private sector and public sector should follow. So what's happening differently for private sector and public sector in terms of AI governance?
Well, I think the public sector is complex in a way that they're not only regulating, but they're also developing sometimes and using AI. So that's why we're seeing a lot of regulation and use cases for AI use in the public sector, which puts the public sector as the user. There are some guidelines on AI development, like the Canadian AI impact assessment for the public sector. So if you develop as a public official an AI system, you need to follow the guidelines and do the impact assessment. And then they have their mandate to regulate as well. So the public sector has the three personas basically, and so that makes it that's why I think that's what leads to confusion. For the private sector is just a little easier. They're either developers or suppliers, users, you know, but they have to abide by the regulation that's in place in their jurisdiction.
Thank you for that. Yes, and I think there's this confusion because of the regulatory wording as well. Another question is again about industries. What is the industry or field that you think is the most advanced in terms of maturity in the EU on the AI governance perspective?
Wow, you know, that's a good question. We usually speak about the financial section. So there are different ways to take this question. So maturity in AI development and use and deployment, and maturity in AI regulation. So maturity in AI regulation, what we've seen going back to the previous question, is that the public sector, and in particular with the executive order, are starting to do much more than what is being asked today for the rest of the population and companies. But in terms of use, if we look at AI use and development, of course, the IT sector, but also financial companies and now healthcare as well, we've seen a lot of adoption in those industries.
Well, I agree. We see increasing adoption rates and also experiments on financial sector, insurance sector, and also HR tech. So
yeah.
probably because of the wider acceptance. And as a last question, maybe I can, because there's a specific question on financial sector as well. This is a very specific one, but I can ask this. We can finish the webinar with this question. How do you see the use of generative AI, especially in the financial sector? examples, customer-facing chatbots, AML fraud detection, stuff like that, considering both the trustworthiness, explainability of these AI systems and the role of financial institutions being the gateway of society. There is an inherent argument here, being financial institutions being the gateway of society. What do you think about that?
Well, I'm not a, maybe you help me with this one, Osman, because I think you know more about finance based on your work on holistic AI than I do.
Well, so what I can say, I picked this question because of this last part. Because when we talk about AI, we see increased adoption. Increased adoption means increased examples of use cases, problems, incidents. So the fact that financial sector use AI the most actually gives us data to regulate them, and that also leads to the maturity as well. So I mean, for generative AI purposes, there are different, of course, use cases, and these are purely regulatory rather than global AI governance issues. But I sort of think that financial sectors in technology adoption rate is quite important for AI regulation, technology regulation in general, because they use it and they show us the shortcomings of a given technology, advantages of a given technology. So I just thought about that.
Yeah, they've been sort of a pilot for many things, right? In the AI policy world. I mean, the financial sector, specifically in the UK, they were the first one to develop a sandbox, you know, to do a controlled environment for new products, and that's something that's being replicated in the AI governance ecosystem. So finance has played a pioneering role in many of these things. I see that we're close to time, but I see a question on from Ed. How does the OECD get input from, if I may just answer it quickly, about the Global South? Given it says that given there is no Global South members in the OECD, this is not completely accurate unless you don't consider Colombia or Mexico as Global South. The OECD has 38 member countries and 8 accession countries, including, as of last week, Thailand, Indonesia, Peru, Argentina. If they're not Global South, I don't know what they are, but we do include Global. So one thing is the membership, and one thing is the people, the countries that participate in our work, which is way broader. In our working party, we have 61 countries. In the observatory, we cover, I think, 130 countries or something with our data and evidence. So we try to be as inclusive as possible. Because we understand that AI is a global issue, but this is a very good question, and I'm happy you asked it.
And thank you for that question. This was a great, actually, question to close our webinar. And our webinar, hope it was good for our audience. Thank you for being our guest speaker today, Louis. It was very informative for me. It was very fun to have you with us here. I'm hoping that we will see each other at OECD events, and I actually incentivize all of our audience to follow OECD's work on AI. Do you have anything to just maybe a couple of sentences to finish this webinar?
No, just to thank everyone who attended and bearing with me for 1 hour. I don't know how you did it. Thank you so much.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Osman.